Okay, so this week we're talking about Tahor Shemen, pure oil. How many people use olive oil in their cooking? Great, good to see. It's healthy stuff. So Yahweh's order to Moshe was to instruct the people of Israel to bring pure oil from crushed olives for the light. But it's a long process because only the first drop from each pressing is set aside for use. So every time that they pressed and crushed with the stones, only the first drop that was produced was used for the menorah. The rest of it was used for other purposes around the temple. Which is the main reason why Hanukkah preparation took 8 days. When you're doing that and only taking one drop, it's going to take at least 8 days to produce enough to keep the menorah lit. And they had to generate enough to keep the oil burning on the pure menorah from dusk until morning. And because it was a permanent regulation through all generations, they didn't just stop at the end of 8 days, they had to continue the process. And it continued on a daily basis using specially cultivated trees that grew to a height of about 6 metres, which is quite high compared to most olive trees that you see here. But in Israel you see some pretty high ones and quite spread out.
Yeah, you chop them, make them stem off, and then you let the side branches hang down so that it's easy to pick them.
Oh, easy to pick the olives. Okay. And I can't remember who it was, but somebody reminded me last week, I think it was Pat, that the thing about olive trees is they can survive anything. They survived the flood. Something just hadn't occurred to me. And she's saying, of course, the trees survived the flood, and then when the waters went down and it dried out, that's why the bird went out, and the first thing it was able to pick was an olive leaf. Because it was the only thing still growing. Everything else was gone. Salt water.
There were trees very close to where we lived in Mali, that were 1,500 years old.
Yeah. So they're pretty hardy. And like we just said, it lived through floods and droughts for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And during Noah's flood, they survived the saltwater inundation. And that's when it dried out again, the dove picked a leaf from them to let them know that it was dry enough for them to land somewhere. An olive tree has to be grown from a seed, usually a stone, from a freshly dropped fruit. But for it to grow, it has to be cracked and broken. When it's been cracked and broken, then it can be planted. But it takes about 3 years for the first fruit to appear. Isn't that interesting? You often see that in newly redeemed people. It takes a couple of years before the first fruit starts to come. And it usually comes from something that's been cracked and broken. The better the roots, the better the nutrition. And it produces a bigger harvest of less acidic fruit in full sun and warm weather. But when the fruit's crushed, the stone has to be crushed as well to maximise the oil. And initially, when the oil is produced, it's just a paste. So when it's crushed and pressed, it produces a paste. And then that paste is pressed to produce pure golden oil. And it's the lack of acidity in the oil that determines its designation. Just 0.8% for extra virgin and 2% for virgin. So in other words, the less acidic we are, the better the oil. I see a lot of people that really need to start tackling their acidity. Now, the problem with wild olives is that wild olives have a very, very strong bitterness, even more than that. They're quite bitter, quite acidic, because they've got a high acidity. Because of that, it takes a skilled graft surgeon time and patience, and over several weeks a vascular connection must take place, and until that connection takes place, the nutrients can't flow. But once the wild olive has been fused onto the cultured plant, there becomes no distinction between the two. So what is the special kingdom olive tree that Jews are a natural part of? And people say, but what kind of fruit? How can you recognise a fruit? Because I don't look for apples and oranges, I look for olives. If you're part of an olive tree, then the fruit you look for are olives. Simple. So what are we as Jews and Gentiles? Jews are natural part of, and Gentiles grafted into. We're grafted into the tree of life. Or are we drafted into the kingdom? Or are we drafted into Israel? Or Yeshua? Or his body? We're all grafted into exactly the same vine, and we all share the same nutrients from the same rich root. We're grafted into the tree of life, which is the kingdom. It is spiritual Israel. It is Yeshua, and it is his body. And because we're all grafted in, once we're grafted in, there is no distinction. We get the same nutrients from the same rich root, which makes us all equal, but not the same. This is where people get confused. We may be equal in him, but we're not the same. We're all expected to trust, which is the spiritual requirement for a continued place in the divine vine. Because without it, we can still be cut off again. People say, I'm saved, that's it. He says, if you don't continue trusting, you will be cut off. And have a look at Romans 11:22. It says so. But crucially, in verse 23, it says that Yahweh is able to graft all of the missing natural Jewish branches back in. Isn't that good to know? All of them can be grafted back in. There's room for them all. How can this happen? If they repent and trust in Yeshua and return to Abba, then and only then they can be grafted in. Only if Gentiles repent and trust can they be grafted in. And only then can both of them produce good kingdom fruit. So we're not actually grafted into Israel. We're actually grafted into Yeshua's body. And like he said, he's the vine and Abba is the gardener. If we get that right, it'll help us to understand who we are, where we are, and what's happening. As we read in Yochanan 15, where he says, I am the real vine, and my Father is the gardener. He's the one who does the pruning. So I'd say he's the one to keep on the good side of. He's the one who does all the pruning. So where do all these roots draw their nutrition from? Next, the angel showed me the river of the water of life, sparkling like crystal, flowing from the throne of Yahweh and of the Lamb, in Revelation 22:1. So where do we draw our spiritual nutrition from? The tree of life planted by the waters of life, the river of life, enabling us to grow and sustain ourselves. So, are we actually expected to produce fruit, or is it optional? Oh no, I'm a bit fed up this year. I don't think I'll produce fruit this year. I'm sick of it. I did it last year and all my branches hit the ground. No, I think I'll give it a miss. Producing fruit is not optional. As Torah says, just as the branch can't put forth fruit by itself apart from the vine, so you can't bear fruit apart from me. So if you're not putting forth fruit, then you've got a problem with your graft. You need to make sure that you're actually grafted into the vine properly. Even more crucial is whether we're actually grafted into the right tree. Are you actually grafted into the olive tree, or are you grafted into an oak tree, or a beech tree, or a pudakawa, or any other tree?
Constantine's tree.
You need to actually make sure that you're grafted into the right tree. And a lot of people out there don't know about the right tree. They don't know about the olive tree. The one that Jews are regrafted back into, and they have to share the same vine. Some people wouldn't like that. You better get used to it, because that is the body. And one half of the body can't just keep saying to the other half of the body, I don't need you. The two halves of the vine both need to be grafted in, and they both, when they do that, need to become the one new man. That's what it talks about with the olive tree, when you can't, once it's been grafted in, you cannot tell the difference. When we're grafted into the vine, and we're grafted into Yeshua, Jew or Gentile, there shouldn't be any difference. Not in that sense. We become part of that thing. We're still different. I'm sure experts could still look at that branch, and even though it's producing the same fruit and it's the same, it probably looks like a wild vine. Still. And the natural ones still look like the natural vines. But in terms of the fruit they produce, and in terms of the nutrients, they're equal. As I keep telling you, as quality control inspectors, we are commanded to examine the fruit. What we're not allowed to do is judge it. But we can inspect it. We're commanded to examine the fruit, to taste the fruit, to smell the fruit, using the same discernment that Abba gives us, as we read in Matthew 7, when he says a healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit. I'm sorry, but that's the bottom line. If there's bad fruit there, then it's not a healthy tree. No matter how hard the unhealthy tree tries, it cannot produce good fruit. And a poor tree can't put forth good fruit, and a healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit. And Yeshua's olive tree is 100% good. It can't put forth anything else but good fruit. You guarantee good fruit if you're part of it. So you say to me, what kind of fruit? Again, in Galatians 5, it states that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, and self-control. So if you're not getting that kind of fruit and producing that kind of fruit, then you need to talk to the gardener. I find it interesting, we saw a program on TV recently, and it's called, is it called Who We Are or something? And it's about the Dunedin study. Who am I? And it's a study that's been done in Dunedin for how many years? About 40 years or something. And they've taken every single baby born in Dunedin, and they've followed them in every single way for that 40 years. And they've still got about 90% of the original batch. And they'll bring them back from overseas and from everywhere and still continue to study them. And what they're saying is that one of the great predictors for people that will have problems as adults is that as children they had no self-control. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Even as children they had no self-control, and they generally grow up to be most of the prison population. Yeah. So if that's the fruit, then one of the main studies you need to study is the qualities and the properties of the fruit. Isn't it important to know the kind of fruit you should be producing and what it should look like and what it should taste like and what it should smell like? You need to have that discernment in your own life and in the lives of others. You need to know that the love is ahava, unconditional love. That the joy comes from His strength. His strength is my joy. That His shalom is the shalom that He gives, not as the world gives it. The patience that you get when you're not silly enough to turn around and say, give me patience and give me now. That, never ever pray that. Not a good idea. Kindness. You need to understand what He means by kindness, mercy, goodness. Am I doing this to look good? Am I doing this to feel good? Or am I doing this to actually just be good? It's a very important thing, and you'd be amazed how many times you ask yourself that. And if you're honest with yourself, you realise that you're doing it to look good or feel good. You can kid yourself that you're actually doing it to be good, and you probably are doing good. But the bottom line for you is that you're actually doing it to look good and feel good. You have to examine your motives. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is a dwindling commodity these days, as we see by the divorce statistics. Humility. We see the exact opposite. The me generation. Apparently they call them millennials now, because they're so self-absorbed. They're constantly telling everybody where they are, what they're doing, and then showing them pictures of themselves doing whatever they're doing. I mean, how many photographs of visiting the supermarket do you want? This is me holding an orange. This is me, you know. This is me in Rotorua. I'm sure all the people in China are so impressed. This is me. Oh, whoops, I'm not meant to put that one up. My parents might see it. People misunderstand humility. They think it's sort of debasing yourself. It's not. Humility is simply not seeing yourself as bigger or better than you actually are. It's looking at yourself with reality. Not putting yourself down, but not building yourself up in that sense. Not puffing yourself up. And remember that meekness is not weakness. Meekness is strength under control. And I've actually found that some of the meekest people in that sense are the heroes that people look up to. And yet when you actually talk to them, that's not what you get. You get this humble, you know. And if you talk to them and say, oh, you did this, you did that, and they'll say, I was just doing what I should have done. I was just doing my job. I was just, you know. And self-control. In our case, Abba provides us with the ability. I don't like the word control because it has wrong connotations, but if you understand, in other words, that He gives us the tools, but it's our job to put them into practice. Self-disciplined, I think, is probably a better word. And it says nothing in Torah stands against these things. So if you do all of these things, you know you're fine. Because there's nothing in Torah that is against them. In Matthew it says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do what my Abba in heaven wants. And therefore I tell you that those who reject the kingdom of God will have it removed from them and given to the kind of people that will produce its fruit. So it's that same analogy. If you look at the branch and it's not producing good fruit, you cut it off. Your spot on the vine will be removed and given to somebody that will be grafted in and will produce the proper fruit. This is something that I look for in myself and in others. And if I think that either I or they are not healthy and producing abundant fruit and growing at the right regular rate, then I go to the gardener and ask him for help and advice. It's a good idea if you have a problem with yourself with fruit, and if you have a problem with other people with their fruit, go to the gardener. Ask him for help and advice. Because the nutrients are not at fault. If you're grafted into the vine, you get exactly the same nutrients as everybody else. So it's not the nutrients that are the problem. They're all equally and fully available to us all. So something must obviously be blocking that process. And as an inspector, I start to recognise them, even as they grow. Because as soon as the first shoot rises above the soil and grows tall, I look for those unique buds and those unique flowers with their unique colour, beauty and fragrance, because they are self-evident. And this is an area in people's growth, spiritual growth, that they need to be very, very careful in. Because by this stage of ministry growth, people often become discouraged. Why? Because they've grown, they're healthy, they produce these beautiful flowers, and everybody says, what lovely flowers, what a beautiful fragrance this person has. And then suddenly, bang, it drops off. Flower's gone. The fragrance is gone. It's a danger area. When their flower fades and dies, they cry out to Abba, what have I done wrong? It's all over. I've failed. My flower's gone. My fragrance is gone. But what they need to understand and be encouraged about is this is the normal process. Because until the flower shrivels and dies, there will be no fruit. As beautiful and as exciting as the flower was, that's not the purpose of the vine. The purpose of the vine is to produce fruit. And until the flower's gone, no fruit can grow. But if they're patient at that time and understand that it's part of the process, when it does, and it will, if the conditions are right, the real you, the real fruit will come, and that's when the real ministry starts. That's the point when people really start to know and trust you, and trust who you are and who you represent. Why? Because they see the fruit. And then, and only then, when the fruit has matured and ripened, will they be able to avoid the sourness and hardness of an unripe fruit. And again, too many people try to minister before their fruit is ripe. Not a good idea. But once it's fully ripe, people can look and taste and smell just how sweet and how good it is. And then comes the next exciting part. When the gardener prunes hard for the next season. You say, what have I done wrong? It's part of the natural process. The reason he's pruning you is not to punish you, but so that you'll produce even more fruit. Trust him. He actually does know what he's doing. He's the only person that says, trust me, I know what I'm doing, that I do trust. Everybody else, the minute they say, trust me, I know what I'm doing, I think, oh no. But when he says it, that's fine. Because he actually does know what he's doing.
Amen.
He planted the first garden. He's the gardener. He taught Adam to be a gardener. The first lesson, the first spiritual lesson on this planet was teaching a man to be a gardener. He didn't set up a Bible school and put him in it. And what was his instruction to him is, go forth and multiply. That's a gardening term. So when the gardener prunes hard for the next season, don't be discouraged. Just understand that there are different seasons and different things happen in different seasons. But the whole purpose of it, if you stay on track, is to produce an even larger crop next year. So to put it into context, Yeshua is divine and we are the branches. The wild ones are still wild and the natural ones are still natural, but we all merge. And when we merge, we become indistinguishable. Why? Because we draw daily from the same source. So I may be wrong, but my understanding is that it's only the olive tree is the only one that happens. If you graft other things into other trees, it will still produce the fruit that it produces, different from the fruit of the tree that it's grafted into. The olive is the only one where that happens. And that's what's happening at the moment. There's trees everywhere. And there's bananas sticking out of them, and there's orange sticking out of them, and there's apples sticking out of them, and there's lemons sticking out of them. And they're all saying, we're the real tree. None of them are the real tree because they're grafted into the wrong vine. They're not willing to be grafted into the vine that makes them into something new, something different. What we need to understand is in this process, we do not become physical Israel. You don't suddenly change from being a Gentile to a Jew. That comes down to genetics. But what we do is not replace Israel, but what we do is become two equal halves of the same body with a variety of unique gifts and responsibilities that cannot be operated in isolation. The gifts that he gives are never meant to be used in isolation. The gifts that he gives only become the gifts that he wants when they become united with each other. And again, this is where we often have a problem, because people turn and say, well, I've got this gift and you've got that gift. And they reject that gift because it's not their gift. And you'll often see organisations, and it finishes up with the person at the top producing a whole heap of little clones of himself. So if you've got an evangelist at the top, his whole focus will be on turning everybody there into evangelists. Why bother with anything else? Why preach to 3 when you can preach to 1,000? If you've got somebody who's a pastor, you will often find a pastoral team. It's not meant to be that way. We all have different gifts, and we need those gifts to be brought together and to be accepted for what they are, to make the body work. They're never meant to be operated either individually or apart from the body. Why? Because the whole is far greater than the sum of its individual parts. Or to put it in Torah context, one can put 1,000 to flight, but two can put 10,000. So you've got two people working hard to put 2,000 to flight. If only they come together, suddenly their authority, their responsibility, their power wouldn't just double, it would just explode. It's like mixing metals together. You get one metal and it's okay, it's reasonably strong. You get another one that's actually weak, it's not strong. But you put the two together and you won't move it. It becomes super strong. Where two or more are gathered, He commands a blessing. Isn't that interesting? The one-man bands are long gone. The person who thinks that he can go off into the wilderness and be John the Baptist, not what he's looking for. Where two or more are gathered, there He commands a blessing. This is a messianic sorry, I've just lost the word. You know when you have to have 10 people for a prayer meeting?
Quorum.
A minyan. A messianic minyan is 2. A rabbinic minyan is 10. But we're okay, we can do it with 2, it says so. It says where 2 are gathered, there's His blessing. It says a single cord is easily broken. 2, still a bit weak. But a 3-corded rope, you won't break it. And what's a 3-corded rope? Jew, Gentile, Yeshua. You take any one or two of those on their own and they will break. But you put all 3 together, you've got something that will not break. They're intertwined and they're bound together, they are unbreakable. Just as the same thing we says, that a husband and wife are to leave their parents and come together, but not on their own. It's only when they come together, husband, wife, Yahweh, becomes that 3-stranded cord that will not be broken. And people say, it says in there that we're not to try and separate something that He's brought together. So how come there's so much divorce around? The reason there's so much divorce around is because He didn't put them together. They were a 2-stranded cord. Sometimes just a 1-stranded, two one-stranded cords. Occasionally there are 2-stranded cord which are strong. But unless it's a 3 will not break. You cannot take it apart because all that will happen is you won't get a clean break, you'll just get jagged edges. And people say, that didn't work out. It's not a condemnation, it's a comment, it's just, all I'm saying is, my question to them is always the same. Did He really bring you together and were you united in Him? It's a question between you and Him. Because when a husband and wife are brought together by Him and with Him in His covenant, with His blessing, not a man-made contract. As I've said many times before, a man-made contract is based on mistrust. A covenant is based on trust. A single or even a double strand, a man-made contract is either a single or a double strand at best, and that's easily broken. It's easily discarded. But we're part of a covenant. We're part of a 3-stranded cord. So shalom, Tahor, Shemen, pure oil, shalom. So if you're feeling a bit crushed this morning, you've just been getting a few more drops of olive oil out of you. It's been grinding into a bit of paste, and out of the paste you're going to produce pure golden olive oil that's transparent. Hmm?